Well, hello. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name's Brandon Kenny. I'm the CEO here at TTx. It's my privilege to introduce Chad Voller to you here, which I'm going to do. This is an exciting new webinar for us, first 5 steps when considering cybersecurity. I know there's going to be some really good content, and I'm excited to participate as well as introduce Chad. For those of you that joined us for a webinar a couple of weeks ago, when we talked about a couple of our security products, I introduced Chad, and his title here at TTx is a Director of Technology. And I know sometimes in the technology industry that the titles can be a little nebulous. So just to share with you what he does for us by way of introduction, Chad spends his time in 3 areas primarily. One of those is to direct and drive our product focus, the things that we offer to our clients, how we go to market with them, and what those products are specifically in the IT space. He spends a lot of time meeting with clients, sharing with them proposals, things in that light that we're doing for our existing clients, and delivering virtual CIO services for our clients that are using us for managed services. But if I could step back from that for just a moment and share with you, in light of this morning's meeting, being the CEO of the business, I have an IT company. If you could separate the IT aspect for just a moment, being a CEO and second generation owner of a business, a couple years ago, I was considering the same thing that many of you may be considering, which is kind of always considering cybersecurity. Going back to my high school and college philosophy class, if you can remember the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, safety is our number 2 concern after, I think, food, water, shelter, our physiological needs. We're all thinking of safety, and I, of course, am thinking of safety for our business and making sure that we're doing the appropriate things to protect it. And cybersecurity is a huge umbrella term, which encompasses many things that would be considered day-to-day, kind of normal business tasks, all the way to worst case scenarios, which you read about constantly in the news and hear about locally and globally. And a couple of years ago, that's really when I engaged Chad, who was not working at TTx, but was running a cybersecurity practice himself within a larger business, and had those concerns for TTx, just as our own business itself. Do we have the right measures in place? Are there things that we could be doing better? What is he seeing in the marketplace? Recognizing that we have a lot of professionals in this building, but we don't have all the answers. And it's great to get an outsider opinion sometimes on how you're taking care of things. We went through an audit that Chad drove as an owner of that organization, and we learned a ton from it, and our acumen in that area, we grew quite a bit. As we've positioned with all of our clients, we're not a cybersecurity company by nature. We're an IT services company, but to be a good IT services company today, you really need to have a capability in cybersecurity. And that's how we ended up working with Chad long enough to bring him in to be a member of our team and lead us in that area, amongst others. He's got a really knowledgeable voice on what a business can do, not only in theory, but also practically. And I think that's something that we've really been able to put into practice for our clients, is the practical aspect of cybersecurity. I think you could go down some serious rabbit holes, and all that stuff is worth taking in. But ultimately, as a business, you have to decide what you're going to do. Many of our clients, and probably many of you that are on this call, profile as a business similar to TTx, not in the industry, but in the size and scope and the type of clients you deal with, the market you're dealing with, the things that you have that you need to secure. So in that sense, we have a similar, I think, footing. And I've found a ton of value in my relationship with Chad as an outside vendor, and of course now as a part of our organization. I think even more than that, I was watching a podcast not too long ago with a former Navy SEAL, and they talked about when they promote people to be in leadership, one of the questions they ask, being military operators, is, I would trust this person with my life, but would I trust them with my keys and my wife? And that stuck out to me as a really profound character statement. And I'm very proud to say, and I say that on behalf of all of TTx, that Chad Voller is one of those guys. We call him Dr. Voller internally. I don't think he owns that title officially, so he's not licensed with the FDA or whoever, and I don't think he actually has a degree that would say that specifically, but he does have that level of expertise as it pertains to our industry. So, and it's a privilege to get to work alongside of him and introduce him to take us down the first 5 steps of cybersecurity. So, Dr. Voller, I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, thank you, brother. I appreciate that intro, Brandon. It's a pleasure to be on the receiving end of those intros and to just be here for these things. I have, for those of you on the call, it's great to be with you. A bit of a internal TTx trivia. This month marks the first year that I have been here. My first full year is May. My TTx work anniversary is in May. So that time has flown by in some ways, and it's kind of like having life when you have kids gets a little bit faster, and as you get older, things just move more quickly. They say that the days are long, but the years are short. So we've been putting in some good, fun, long days here, but the years do tend to go by. So thanks for that intro, Brandon. Good to be with all of you this morning. I appreciate your time and your attention. I'm going to get my screen shared out here, and we'll start into our presentation. I learned last time that I have to click into the presentation to get it to advance one slide, and so I've done a little trick of duplicating that first slide so I don't experience what happened last time on the webinar. If you joined us for the Proof Point and Sentinel-1 webinar, welcome back. Good to have you, and glad to be getting into things here. It is fun to talk about these things. I know not everybody in the world would say that, because cybersecurity is one of those sort of constant headlines, and a lot of the headlines are bad news. But that, to me, that merits thinking more about it. I have a gene for defending people and organizations, so that works well for kind of how I'm designed and how I tick internally. I am sort of like a protector by nature, so cybersecurity fits into my personality very well, and that's why I have found it both fascinating and also have enjoyed that in my professional career. So my hope is that the webinar will be not only informational, but also might give you some actionable items and might even be a little bit of fun. Brandon was mentioning Maslow's hierarchy of needs that begins with basic survival needs like food and shelter and sleep, and then moves on to things like safety, love, belonging, other things as well. But what I found, I think the most basic need in our modern lives is actually, for a lot of us, is actually Wi-Fi. I've seen this out there. I thought it would be kind of fun to bring this up. So I think, ironically, we tend to go to our phones and our internet stuff very, very first. And for some people, I think maybe it does actually become more important than survival and safety. So I told you we'd have some fun. So we're starting out on the fun side. But as we move into the steps, before we get into the steps, let me give you a little bit of a history on the word cybersecurity. Just a little bit of trivia to kind of kick us off. And it was interesting to go and do some research on it. If you do some research on the word cybersecurity, you'll probably come across the term cybernetics in your studies. Back in the 40s, this mathematician / scientist came out with his big work, right? Cybernetics is the name of the work, but that's also the term that he coined. And it had to do with this idea of systems and feedback, and he pseudo predicted devices like modern personal computers, devices that would do the computations that we're able to do now in microseconds, and coined that term cybernetics. For the next several decades, the word cyber as a prefix was not widely used in any particular ways. But when you creep into the 80s, when you creep into the early 1980s, you run into this term that a DJ said on the radio. He said the term cyberpunk. Yeah, there's some cyberpunk for you. He's known as saying. And it started to catch on a little bit and became a bit of a subculture term. They had the movie Blade Runner. It kind of worked its way down into fashion and style, right? It had the cyberpunk sort of kind of became a style. And then late in the 80s, 1989 is actually the first documented use of the word cybersecurity. And I had a little bit of fun thinking that if smartphones had been invented in the late 90s, late 80s or early 90s, they might have called them cyber phones. I think we're probably all thankful that we don't have cyber phones in our pocket. We just have our smartphones. So we were spared from that terminology. So just a fun little history on that. And we'll click back through that slide again. But here's where I think, before we get into the actual steps of a good, a cybersecurity program, I think one thing we ought to do is begin with the end in mind as we start the conversation. We'd all like to be the guy at the top of the stairs here. We'd all like to be kind of finished and at a point of perfect maturity with our cybersecurity program where everything is well orchestrated and we've reached that final level of the capability maturity model. And we would love to be there. The truth is we have to start somewhere, but beginning with the end in mind of what, and when I say the end, I'm not referring to a particular exact fixed point on the horizon of the cybersecurity spectrum, because it really is a conversation about maturity. It's organizational maturity, it's operational maturity, it's technical maturity. These things we're all on that maturity spectrum in those different ways and at different points along that path. So just want you to keep in mind, while we would like to be kind of finished with it, I don't know that this, at least in the next few years, I don't think that this climb is going to come to an end where we can just all rest easy and say, well, now we're done with cyber and we're going to move on to the next stuff. And let me also offer this caveat that not everyone shares my opinions. And while I don't have an official doctorate from anywhere, these opinions are formed from my experience as an operator in the field, as a system administrator, as a help desk person, as a director of information technology, as a cybersecurity credentialed advisor and practitioner, and as well as a leader when it comes to managed service organizations and services. So these are things that come from what I've seen over the years and the opinions that I have formed along the way, which are informed by a lot of different learning and a lot of personal experiences. I will allude to some of those things along the way. And while I love the imagery of a staircase and steps, I think it feels a little bit more like walking a tightrope when it comes to being in cybersecurity. Feels a little bit more like we're kind of out in the middle on our own. Maybe we have this one, right? This guy's got like one safety strap attached to a harness, which feels like not very much to me. I've never walked a tightrope. I don't think I ever will walk a tightrope like this. Although we do have the latest version of I'm not sure if it's called the Oculus Rift or whatever. We have one of those like things where you put on the goggles and you're in a virtual gaming space and then you can walk the plank. I don't know if any of you have seen this. We actually have one of these here in-house at TTx. And we've been all kind of experiencing this virtual reality. So I have walked the plank out of the end of a skyscraper. And even that freaks me out enough to not actually try it in reality. But I've actually cropped this picture. And I would, for obvious reasons in a second here, but just another little bit of fun here. I'm wondering, what are these people doing up here in the corner of this picture? I was like, listen, it's a free, copyright-free image. I'm thinking, obviously, this thing was staged. But anyway, there's some folks up there kissing in the corner for whatever reason. I'm not sure if these folks are prepared for their cybersecurity or not, but there they are. So let's move on with our steps. I think the first step when it comes to, all right, what are the first things we need to do, Chad? I'm going to go with governance and guidance as your first thing, as your primary. Governance and guidance. These ideas answer the question of, all right, well, how are we going to approach cybersecurity? What is our posture going to be as an organization? And how are we going to approach it? And also it answers the question, why and how are we going to do this? And how are we going to do what first and when, and all those kinds of things. A cybersecurity framework is your guidance and your governance for how to do these kinds of things. It will help you. The framework is more guidance. Governance is the internal policies and the direction that you attach to those things. If you aim for nothing, you're bound to hit it. I don't know who said that, but that phrase sticks with me. So if you have no guidance and if you have no governance, there's a good chance you're just kind of reaching in the dark or listening to the latest headline or looking at the next shiny product to install and get behind that. This also speaks to the idea of top-down leadership when it comes to cybersecurity for your organization. Cybersecurity is not a function of your IT department. I'm going to challenge you with this thought. Cybersecurity is a function of the organization. It is not a function for the IT system administrators. The organization has to own the idea of cybersecurity. We cannot just offload that idea onto our IT team and say, you are now responsible for cybersecurity. It doesn't work like that. I understand that practically speaking, the IT team and the solutions providers like TTx, they execute a lot of these things when it comes to cybersecurity because we're talking about protecting digital assets as well as physical assets. But philosophically and conceptually, the organization has to own, like Brandon was referencing, considering the idea of cybersecurity and how that impacts the people that work alongside of us every day, and how that impacts the future of my organization and what that looks like. It has to be something that is owned by leadership as a function of the business. That's something that I believe in the core of my being about cybersecurity and who is ultimately responsible for it. My take is that it ultimately that burden belongs to the organization, not to the IT people. So top down, trickle down leadership, that's a real thing. If you are buying into that, if you are sold on the importance of it as a leader and as an owner, then that is naturally going to carry over into how you think about it, how you spend about it, how you lead about it, and all of those things. So I think you got to start with guidance and governance. There's some great guidance that is out there. I'll recommend 2 cybersecurity frameworks to you. One is called the CIS Critical Security Controls. This used to be called the CIS Top 20. They didn't rebrand, but they shuffled around how they packaged their controls together. And now there are 18. So they can't call it the Top 20 anymore. They just call it the CIS Critical Security Controls. And that is, you can Google that. You also get a link to that from Brian Schultz in the webinar follow-up emails that you'll see. We'll send you a link to that. Another one is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. NIST is an acronym, the National Institute for Standards and Technologies, which is actually part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, believe it or not the Department of Defense. So the cybersecurity framework was developed in response to an executive order by President Obama, which came in 2013. That's Executive Order 13636. And subsequently, in February of 2014, version 1 of the NIST cybersecurity framework was published. So you can look that up too. It's NIST. But again, we'll send you a link there to that. There are others as well. These are 2 of the heavy hitters out there. NIST is pseudo mandated for like government agencies, and but is also available to the public, and it is available to folks. It's also mandated portions of the NIST, like 800, 171. Those are relegated to folks who are doing work for the government, for the DoD. And there are some requirements that are attached to maybe even some of your organizations. You may know about that already. So again, beginning with guidance is absolutely critical for the success of a cybersecurity program. I would call that step 1, answering, why are we doing this and how are we going to go about doing it? How are we going to think about it and package these ideas together? You have the CIS critical security controls and the NIST framework to reference for guidance on those. For our next one, unironically, both the CIS critical security controls and the NIST cybersecurity framework begin with this: asset inventory and management. So asset inventory and management answers the question, what do we have and where is it? The idea being that it is very difficult to protect something if you don't know that you need to protect it, if you don't know what it is and where it is. Imagine yourself trying to protect your property. Imagine then not knowing the boundaries of your property. So imagine you're going to have to build a fence, some kind of protective domain, protective area. Maybe an ancient king would have to protect his kingdom with some sort of barriers and defenses of some kind, right? If you don't know the extent to which your property goes, and in the world of cybersecurity, we're talking about both physical and digital assets, because the digital assets impact the physical security and the physical protection of the data that is the digital asset as well. So you have to think of both. But imagine you not knowing what that is as an ancient king, or even as a modern person. My wife and I are trying to protect our chickens. We've had some recent chicken losses on the Voller farm, and so we're trying to do some things. And what I'm doing is I'm fortifying our defenses for the chickens. I am building new structures in place. I am adding additional protective layers, and I know where those things need to go because I know where those things exist and what they are. I know how I can go about protecting them to the best of my ability. I can then make my investments in fencing and posts and hardware cloth and do the design work and all that kind of stuff. So if you know what you have and if you know where it is, then you can that rolls right into the fundamental building block steps of what a good cybersecurity program looks like. So you begin with governance and guidance. You move on to asset inventory and management because you need to answer those questions. What do I have? Where is it? What's the serial number in that thing? Is it under warranty? What office is it in? Who's using it? All those kinds of things. Is it patched? Are those programs up to date? Are we on the latest firmware? You got to know that stuff in order to be able to protect it. Fundamentals like blocking and tackling, as we used to say in football. The third thing that I would recommend, and granted, I am cheating a little bit on this slide because it's actually like 4 things, but they all go together. So you'll humor me, you'll permit me to have this as a talking point because they're all directly related to one another. So you have the idea of business continuity. So yet we say BC, DR, and I are business continuity, disaster recovery, and incident response. Planning for those 3, and testing for those 3. So really, maybe it's more like 6 things. This is I'm cheating big time on this slide. This answers the question, well, what if something bad happens to those to the what and the where? And my guidance will help me with the how to respond. And these things will fit under the continuity of that entire governance that we talked about before. So business continuity. How do I prevent service interruptions as much as possible? Disaster recovery. If something goes wrong and I need to recover from a major event, what is that? What is my capability to recover? How long is that going to take me? And how far back am I going to be able to recover to? What point in time going backwards am I going to be able to recover to? An incident response speaks to the idea of what happens during some kind of security incident. What happens in the heat of the battle? How is my team going to respond? So these concepts carry the idea of redundancies, backing up. What's my backup plan? How is that not just the technical aspects of that, but what is the plan? How have I documented that plan? Sometimes in the service industry, we say if you didn't document it, you didn't do it. So if we go to look back at a service ticket and it's poorly documented, we will find ourselves wondering, well, what action did we take? What did we plan to do? And what are we going to do if this happens again? We have to be able to answer those questions. So it's not just, do you have a backup? It is, well, what's the planning that I'm involving around that backup? How often am I going to back that stuff up? Where am I going to back it up to? What's the pattern of backing? Am I going to do a full and then some incrementals and some differentials? How does that work? How does that work in modern terminology? What's my backup, my business continuity plan? Backup kind of fits into that idea. Disaster recovery, let's assume some kind of loss. That's what disaster recovery speaks to. Let's assume loss. What if I do have a loss? That could be the loss of an office. That could be the loss of data. So physical location, digital assets, it's the what and the where. If I have multiple offices, what happens if that office is all of a sudden, if that's unavailable to me? And I have to recover from, like, if they have a disastrous or a catastrophic loss there, what mitigations am I putting in place to be sure that I'm going to be able to recover? And we tend to think of these things in natural ways, like we're going to have we have backups. We have multiple copies. So a backup. Here's how I think of backups for the sake of conversation. It's not just the first copy. The first copy is okay. You may have like an initial. Well, let's call it a backup copy, but if you care about any data, you need to have it in triplicate, and hopefully you have it in a fourth place as well. Here's what I mean by that. If I have a primary server cluster in location A, say I have that at my headquarters, I have a location B, I want to at some point in time get a copy of the primary data at my primary location. I need to make copies of that stuff on a regular basis. So I need to, quote unquote, back that up. That initial backup is kind of like to use my dad's analogy, one of his favorite ones, and one that I repeat time and time again, is if you're putting on your clothes in the morning, you're getting dressed, you're going to put on your belt, right? You get your pants on, you get your shirt on, you get your tie on, whatever, you put your belt on, your pants, and then you can go off to the office. Now, my dad would humorously kind of make fun of people who wore a belt and suspenders because they kind of serve the same purpose. But in the world of backups, I like belt and suspenders. Maybe not from a fashion perspective, right? We wouldn't see people walk around that way. But from a disaster recovery perspective and a backup and continuity for the backups, you want to have another copy, which becomes kind of like your first official backup is really your third copy of your data. Now, these systems need to be connected to each other, right? They need to be online and connected. So what's that fourth one I was mentioning? First of all, you're getting them offsite. So you're getting a copy, then you're moving a copy offsite. Maybe that first copy is also offsite. It could be in the cloud. That counts as offsite if you don't have multiple locations. The thing you need to do, that fourth copy, is what I refer to as cold storage. You need to have some kind of offline cold storage. This is an inexpensive tool. It's an inexpensive way to back things up. You can buy some large capacity hard drives because they're easy to replace. If they fail, you can just buy another one because they're super cheap, a couple $100. You want to form some kind of backup of your data and then unplug it. That's what I mean by cold storage. So a habit that I have been in at places where I've been in IT leadership is we will have some kind of backup that we do on a regular basis. We used to rotate disks on a weekly basis. So we would have multiple large capacity hard drives. We would plug them in and we had a backup program. I buy some cheap software, back things up to that external hard drive. You can encrypt that hard drive first, and you can start backing up to it. Then you can rotate those things in and out. So at any given time, you have a offline, i.e. not connected to any computer or network, copy of your critical data, your most important data. You don't have to copy everything to that fourth copy, but you can copy your critical stuff. So if you need to recover your database, your ERP system, your critical files, your working files right within your organization, if you have that copy, and believe me, it's come into play and it has saved my bacon more than once. If to have that offline copy to save people doing a bunch of rework and to save yourself from catastrophic data loss, I highly recommend that as part of your DR plan. And incident response, big deal. Planning that out and having the knowledge that you have a workflow to go through. You have some kind of working active flow chart through which to take your team during an incident. Big deal. I think maybe my first, no, it's my third month on the job, not here, somewhere else. The third month on the job, we had an incident. We had a ransomware incident. All of a sudden, files started getting encrypted on the server. And we did not necessarily have an incident response plan in place at that time. I was brand new to the organization, so you can imagine lots of policies and things hadn't been created yet. We were flying by the seat of our pants. Now, we came out successfully from that. We were able to completely recover. We only lost a couple hours of work, and the attackers weren't really that savvy. But suffice it to say that if we had had that incident response plan in place, we could have just followed a run book and known what to do and know where, rather than Chad just pointing and shouting and telling people, okay, you go do that, and you go do that, and you go do that, and all that kind of good stuff. It's great to have a plan when you need one, right? And I've got to mention, testing might be the most important word on this slide. If you have a backup, disaster recovery, incident, you can have all those plans. You can have all of those plans. But if you don't test those things, if you aren't kind of testing those items, we used to go around and check locked doors when I was working on a safety team. We would check the locked doors. They had the lever style. Like a lot of corporate environments, you have not a doorknob, but a handle that you just, it's a lever that presses down. We would test that. If it's locked on the inside, you can't push down on that handle. But if it went like this, you knew that it was unlocked on the other side, and you could go around, you could press the knob in, and you could lock the door. Because we wanted people in an emergency response, if we were having some kind of like violent altercation, we wanted teachers to be able to just close their doors and not worry about whether or not the door was locked. So you have to test these things. You can have backups going, but if you're not testing those backups, you don't know if they're reliable when you need them the most. So testing is critical for all those components. That could be a tabletop test. That could be a penetration test from a third party. It could be some kind of system audit that you hire out for somebody. You got to test your systems. You got to test those plans for recovery. And that also puts you through your paces in terms of the mechanics of it when the time arises. So a big deal. Again, I know I'm cheating on this slide because they put several items into one step, but they're all very contiguous ideas. And so I think it's critical and super important that we follow those along to answer the question, what if something happens? For step 4, I'm going to step off the philosophy wagon for a minute and the policy wagon. We're going to talk about what about just protecting the perimeter, Chad? What if the only thing I can do right now is protect the edge, just get something in place? What can I do? I'm not quite sure where to start. I've got 2 suggestions for you. They do kind of go together in my head. And if you were on the previous webinar, this will sound familiar. At the bare minimum, people need to have email security and endpoint security in place. Amidst all the gazillion other things that could possibly fit on this slide, this is the one that I'm going with. I believe if you have robust email security and endpoint security with multi-factor, you at least have the groundwork started from a technical perspective to protect your perimeter in a way. The perimeter is no longer the 4 walls of the buildings that we work in. Now identity is more of the perimeter, so people are going for those credentials. If they get your credentials and you don't have MFA in place, then people could get dwell time. They can gain dwell time within your network. They can observe. They can do their reconnaissance. They can figure out what it is that they're going to do before they launch their attack. They'll have time in your system. If you don't have multi-factor authentication on, kind of like Frank's Red Hot, right? Put that stuff on everything. Put it on everything that you can. We select Proofpoint Essentials for our email security platform, and we select SentinelOne for our endpoint protection platform. Both incredible, robust products. It used to be the case that some programs and vendors would try to do both. Some are still doing both. They'll say, we're going to do email protection and we're going to do endpoint protection. But in our world, we want someone who is world-class, absolutely trustworthy in both of those spaces, who is leading among their peers. And when you do your research on these things, and experientially as an end user and purchaser of these products ourselves, and using them on our systems, we trust them enough to do that. We're not just resellers of things. We actually use these tools because we think they are the best that are out there. These are world-class products and programs that can help you in your organizations. And multi-factor just goes right on there with it. If you don't have multi-factor and someone grabs your credentials from an end user who happens to click on a phishing email, then an attacker can gain dwell time in your network and you might not even know it. So protecting that perimeter, doing the absolute basics. I understand some of us are in that place where all we can do is the basics. An email security platform that exists outside of your email infrastructure. So Proofpoint would sit in front of, let's say, your Office 365 tenant. It would sit in front of your on-prem Exchange environment, something between your email system and the rest of the world. I think it's important to have that. It speaks to the ideas of business continuity. If your email platform becomes unavailable, if you have Proofpoint in place, you can send and receive email from your email address, no problem. If you have Sentinel-1 in place, our engineers can backdoor that machine, take it off the network, and still have a command line access to recover, roll back from ransomware even in some cases. So having those things in place aligns you with some of the things I've already spoken about in the webinar as well. It's like temporary housing when you're building your new house and you're living in temporary space, if it's an apartment or a hotel or whatever. That's kind of the idea here. If you need to get to some temporary space while you're kind of building your cybersecurity house, no problem. I remember moving from Connecticut to Dallas. We were in the Hartford, Connecticut area, or I should say Ridgefield, Connecticut, and we moved down to the Dallas area, and we had to live in the hotel for a while. This was back in the day when companies were still footing the bill for your travel expenses and for moving expenses. So we lived in a hotel for like 7 weeks or something like that before the house was finished. So this is what you can do if you're in that circumstance. It's okay. We're not pointing a finger at you. We're not singling you out and trying to shame you with this. If you need to get some basic stuff in place, talk to us about Proofpoint and Sentinel-1. We'd love to have that conversation to get you going. If you're doing that stuff, good for you. Great job. If you're not doing multi-factor with that stuff, shame on you. No, just kidding. If you're not doing multi-factor, work toward that. Please work toward getting multi-factor in place. It is probably the single most effective technical control that you can put in place to protect your organization. If you already have those other things in place, please consider rolling out multi-factor authentication on any system that you can. Again, like Frank's Red Hot, put that stuff on everything. The last one might hit home for us because it's changing your view on cyber spending. The last thing, really, which could be the first thing. If we think back through it, this actually could be the very first thing we talked about today. But I saved it for last intentionally, just to talk about conceptually as a business, how do we think about cybersecurity? Are we thinking as a business owner, as someone who has to pay those bills, as someone who has to write checks to pay expenses? Are we just thinking of it as an expense or an insurance policy? I would like us to begin thinking about it more of an assurance policy. How am I going to assure my team that we are going to be able to maintain business continuity, that we're going to be able to have the ability to recover from a disaster? How can I assure the people that I work with, the customers that I support? I want to offer this more as an assurance policy rather than an insurance policy, because we want to think positively about cybersecurity. I know that it's an expense, and I know that on the GL that it doesn't go in the credit column. And I understand that in a sense where it's not putting us more into the black when it comes to the bottom line, is it? I get that. I get that from a financial, just a financial binary angle, if you will. But I would like us to consider maturing our view of cyber spending and think of it more as an investment and an assurance posture that we have on behalf of the organization that we're supporting, the organization that we're leading, the organization that we own, all those kinds of things. I think we have to mature a little bit in terms of how we view spending for cybersecurity purposes. Because I know a lot of the things that I've mentioned within the slide deck, these things are not always going to be the cheapest things. But I had in mind this idea of, when you have a child, and look, thinking has changed on what it means to protect that child when they're an infant, especially when it comes to how we put them in the car. When I was a kid, right, mom and dad just kind of like chucked us in the back seat, right? Well, nowadays, you invest in, you do your research on the things that you want to do to most protect the most precious ones in your life. And that means you are going to go invest in a high quality, high-end car seat. You are going to spend on that. You're going to willfully spend on that because you're protecting the most precious people in your life. And so when I tend to think of cybersecurity with that kind of protector DNA, I think of it as protecting people and organizations and livelihoods. That's really what we're doing here. And that is worth spending on, right? That's a worthwhile investment into to pour into the future of your organization from a security perspective so that your organization doesn't become a statistic. And like a university that I read about earlier this week that is closing its doors because they were not prepared for cyber defenses or recovery, they're actually having to close down the school. Just imagine for a college how that is going to impact the students and the faculty and the administrative people. And I mean, you're talking about impacting hundreds, maybe even thousands of people's lives. Had they considered some of these steps and gotten to these basic steps along the way, I think that they might be able to tell a different story one day. And right now, today, they might be telling a very, very different story. And I'm sure they would be much happier if they had had some of these basic things in place. So there you have the first 5 steps, if you will. This is my perspective from the time that I've spent in the field and learning and growing and understanding the nature of systems and people and organizations that are out there. You begin with the end in mind, of course, before even you get to the first steps, but you have to have some kind of guidance and leadership. So you have your governance, your policies, your frameworks in place to get you going to guide you along the way. That's going to be your guide along the river, right? You're going to have some kind of asset inventory and management system to keep track of what you have and where it is. You're going to want to be able to have a business continuity, disaster recovery, incident response plan in place so you know how to behave when something goes wrong. You're going to want to have, at the very least, email security and endpoint security in place. For the immediate needs, for the temporary housing. If you can't get to anything else, at least get to the point where you have robust email security and endpoint security like Proofpoint and SentinelOne. And then lastly, think about your view. Think about the way you think about spending when it comes to cybersecurity. I would love for people to kind of like migrate a little bit from the old school thinking of, oh man, I have to spend this money. This is such a bummer, to thinking, okay, I'm going to thoughtfully consider how to increase this spend over time, because it's becoming more and more apparent that if I don't, that I may be risking the livelihoods and the well-being of my people and my own organization. So thank you so much for being with us here today at TTx. We're so glad that you're joining with us on our webinar series. We're going to continue on our next webinar in June. We're going to be talking about hyper-converged infrastructure and our partnership with Scale Computing. That'll be a great one, be a fun one. Hope to see you on that one, and many more to come. Hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday. I'll pause for a quick minute here, and I'll see if there are any questions in the chat that I may have missed. Let me stop my screen share. Thank you for all the sweet thumbs up that y'all are putting out there. I don't see any messages in the chat or in the thing, so lucky me. I can just wish you a fantastic day and rest of your week. Thanks again for joining us, for being loyal partners of ours. We love working with all of you, and we'll see you again next time. Take care.